Yeah, bask in all that free advertising you get, Elegoo. None of these guys will give you time of day unless you have more than 10,000 subscribers. So that being said, please like and subscribe for more content. But for now, I want to say, oops, I did it again. Time to delve in a little bit deeper with some TMC 2225 stepper motor drivers. And why, you may ask? Well, as we all know, I have the dual Z-axis motors on my machine, but for some reason, the right side seems to gravitate upward a little bit. Still, no matter what I do. I think it might have to do with my wheels being a little too tight over here, causing some binding, but I'm not getting any Z-axis height issues. I'm just I'm getting that. Not sure why. I'm not hearing any clicking of lost steps or anything like that. I've double checked the motor connections and it just drifts. I don't know why. So, that being said, I've taken it upon myself to delve into the nitty-gritty and get a beta copy of firmware from one Mr. Michael Lee. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. And bastardize the Marlin firmware to accept 2 independent Z-axis lead screws fully capable of self-aligning for Z-axis correction. Not sure how well it's going to work with the standard D-Win interface, but I guess we'll find out together. I'm going to crack this thing open, stab in the motor driver. You know, it's funny, it's cheaper to buy 5 of them than it is to buy a single one. So I'll stab that in. I'll get the firmware ready to load. Hopefully I can flash a backup if I toaster this thing, but so let's see if we can make magic or if we're going to turn this thing into a brick. All right, so I rolled her over on her side, got the cover off the bottom. I've seen way too much of this board. I've seen this thing 1, 2, 3 too many times. But that all being said, I do want to point out that up in this area here are your limit switch provisions, and over here there's a spot for a BL touch. I'm hoping to get to that one of these days, because I did find that I have some findings, and I posted a little video about it, but I discovered, well, most of the time I believe that the touch sensors on 3D printers just tie into the Z negative limit switch, but this thing uses a resistive strain gauge to sense when it makes pay dirt on the table, and that strain gauge ties to a little box over on here underneath the filament sensor. But what that does is it supplies a digital signal, a 0 and a 1, to the limit switch when it makes actual contact. So that all being said, you can circumvent the use of the strain gauge and put a micro switch or a BL touch in place of it. And I'm assuming that the BL touch pins over here just correlate to the PWM signal that the BL touch needs to fire the solenoid up and down. And then the other signals just tie into the Z negative limit switch. So not doing any of this in the past, I'm just going based on the assumption that you just match green to green, black to black, and everybody's hunky-dory. I might have to flip a jumper, so I'm going to look into that real fast so I don't toast one of these things. I mean, I got 4 more of them, so we shall see. And then once that's in place, take Mr. Sticky Tape off of the heatsink, stick it on there, and we're good to go. So these 2225 stepper drivers, from what I understand, are the same as the ones that are integrated onto the board here. And you can use the TMC 2208s. They are interchangeable, but these supposedly have a little bit more chooch to them. I don't know. They run cooler and more efficient, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I build CNC machines. This is, in fact, sort of like a CNC machine. It does take a bunch of G0s and G1s, and Marlin firmware will actually support circle interpolation, things like that. Marlin firmware is actually based on Gerbil, whatever you want to call it. The Arduino answer to driving a CNC machine. Anyway, I'm going to consult Dr. Google real quick to see what I have to do to get this stepper board to not let out any of its magic smoke. And we will reconvene once that is plugged in and ready. So these stepper drivers seem to have some little fiddly bits that you have to use to set your current limit. So in the case of this driver here, I'll link to a video from Teaching Tech. I'm not going to sit here and go on and on about it if it's already been done before. But essentially what you want to do is you have to calculate what your VREF limit is going to be for your current by turning this little itty bitty potentiometer that's on this board. Once the board is in place, you put your negative onto your incoming power, in this case the 24 volt coming into here. Then you put your positive lead onto the potentiometer. And what I did was I took my multimeter, the red lead, and I just stuck it onto the clip of the screwdriver. I did the VREF calculation, and it should have been 1.2 maximum, so I set it to a 1.0 VREF. The jumpers that are below the board here set the micro stepping. So I know I have to set this to 16 micro steps, and I'm under the impression that the jumpers all in place are 16 micro step, but they could be 32. I got to double check this board to make sure, but ultimately I would just unplug this and remove one of the jumpers to set the micro steps properly. So, like I said, I'll link to the Teaching Tech video because I don't want to take any of the credit for learning what I did to get this installed, really. Just going to hook up the original motor lead right here to the original motor. I'll run that to the Z-axis. I'll plug in the Z-axis splitter into the E-axis plug. And then I will flash the firmware, and hopefully we don't burn anything up. So the one thing you're going to notice if you get these 2225 drivers is that the heat sinks that they supply are just a hair too tall for the Neptune 3 housing. I did manage to make it work, but let's just say, don't try this at home, kids. I really don't want to talk about it. Reunited and it feels so good. I got the original motor cable plugged back into the Z provision here. I've got the the Creality motor plugged into here. I've got my VREF set. This side of it should all be done. I've got it attached to the motor. I disconnected the split lead on the Elegoo motor. Here's the pigtail for that. So hardware-wise, that should be all we need. What I need to do now is I need to disconnect and prop up the lead screws so that I've got free motion in the ocean for the motors, so that way when I test out the firmware and the Z motion, I could check to make sure they're spinning the right way and that they look like they're spinning at relatively the same rate. So I think I found my issue, and it lies in these supports here. This one seems to bind up a little bit, but I won't know for sure until I get it readjusted. I was fiddling around with the screws to get them up in the position, and I had my half of my anti-backlash nut went shooting across the room. So I believe that I do have a little bit of an alignment thing, even though I did test it at full extent, top and bottom. It does seem like it might be rubbing just enough to lose just enough steps for the left side to be sagging down as it goes up, because it can't fight it, but not enough that it's making that familiar crunchy, clunky kind of sound, that dook 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 dook. So that might be something to address once this is done. But I have the motors disconnected from the screws, both sides. Going to flash the firmware. I compiled the binary last night. I got, like I said, I got the beta from Mike Lee, and I poked into it a little bit to find out that there were a couple of things that still needed to be tweaked. But hopefully, between he and I, because I'm relatively brand new to this stuff, but between he and I think we might have winter chicken dinner with us, and I guess we'll find out in a couple minutes. Okay, so after compiling, I got the zmprobin.nano.bin file. I put it onto the SD card, put it into the slot, powered up, loaded the firmware, and I'm happy to say that it does work. It works opposite to the other motor, and it's only going about half the distance, so I just have to play around with the stepper settings and change the direction of the motor. I believe that there is a pin to do that in Marlin, or a setting to do that in Marlin, so I'm going to do that, reflash the firmware, and start reassembling. So I gotta flip the thing back up on its side, mess around with the jumpers, and see what is what with that. So she's all back together. Motors are spinning the right direction. The pitch was okay. And now I'm just running a quick auto bed level. Then I will remove my Garolite G10 sheet, because I don't know if this thing's going to go Skynet on me if I try to do the G34. I do have to, I think I do have to do a little bit of tweaking of this side of the rail, though, because I can't quite get it perfect without smushing the wheels a little bit. So I'm going to play around with the adjustment before I go try to do the auto level. But I removed the one screw support because this one's giving me a hard time. I think I may just go naked. I may just say kiss off and leave it to dingle in the breeze. I had the same issue on my CNC router, so I don't see it being an issue. But we're going to run auto bed level in just a second. And future endeavor, ironically enough, future endeavor is going to be, if I can find it, I'm going to print out a housing for over here to mount an emergency stop switch. Because right now, I'm kind of flying blind with this thing going through the auto bed level, and I don't want it to Skynet on me. But if it does, the only course of action I have is power switch. So I want to build that into here as well. I want to set it up so that it runs through one of the limit switch. You guys call it end stops, but I call it limit switch. We are not the same. Going to run it into one of the limit switches that are open as an available input, and configure it so that when I hit that, it will throw an emergency condition, and then I probably have to pop it out and reset it anyway. But oh, here it goes. Let's see what you do. Okay, so it's running through. Not thrilled with that result so far, but like I said, I do have to adjust this a little bit. when I set my Z's, it gets a little close to there, doesn't it? Yeah, it just clears. When I set my x-axis level, I put a piece of paper on the G10 board because I'm lazy and I don't feel like taking it off. But then I take these 1, 2, 3 blocks, I put those on the paper, and then I bring the X carriage down, or the Z axis down onto the X carriage, and put the 1, 2, 3 blocks on the table because it's a fixed table. You could do that with a fixed table if you had the springs or the latex condoms or what have you. You wouldn't be able to put them directly on the glass here. But I put the 1, 2, 3 blocks down, and I set my level on the 1, 2, 3 blocks. These are precision ground match pair, so they should be the creme de la creme. Okay. Yeah, you can see it's cattywampus like so. But so far, I mean, I'm seeing the motors both spinning, so that's a good sign. So I'll run through this. I will take the gantry apart, get it to where it is able to run free. Because really what you want is you want to have a little bit of play here. You snug the wheel up so that these, you get a good friction out of these. With this side here, you want it to kind of be able to float a little bit because of the nature of the auto leveling. It's going to want to shift one motor one way, one motor the other way. So you need to have a little bit of wiggle room for that racking, or else it's going to bind. It's not horrible, all things considered. I'm usually, like I said, about 0.5, which is like 20 thousandths, but I know I can get this better, and hopefully the G34 will help with that. You know, the beauty of the internet is that everything that you see and read and hear is true. It's absolutely true. Anything you can find on the internet, god damn it, it's 100% factual. So the information that I got from the motor was a little bit misleading. I double checked again and found out that this motor may or may not be a 0.8 max current, not a 1.5, even though Dr. Google says 1.5. So I readjusted the stepper driver to 0.64 VREF, which after the calculation minus the 90% of the calculation, blah blah blah. Because I noticed that when I was moving the X up and down, I was hearing like a staticky noise, like a high pitch kind of, hard to explain. And I lowered it down from 1.0 to 0.64, and now it's quiet again. I did notice that also the motor was getting a little warm, so I'm going to keep an eye on that and see what goes on, see if it stays that way. This was also, you could feel the heat coming off of it with the cover on. I put my hand over, I could feel the heat, so I want to double check that and see what the story is with it. But it is working. The gantry auto tilt doesn't seem to be working quite yet, but I'm going to dig into it a little bit more and see if I can get it to cooperate. If not, then I will reach out and ask for the help of Mike Lee and the others in the Marlin community, and hopefully they can come up with a resolve. So that'll pretty much conclude it for right now. Thank you for watching, and again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you like the content, please do like and subscribe. Try to get me over that 10K mark so that I can get some free stuff. Yeah! Nah, actually, I don't even care. I'm just doing this because I enjoy it. I like tinkering around with this stuff. So if you do enjoy this content, stick around. Again, there will be plenty more. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.